In Indonesia, last month, university students across the nation held demonstrations to protest the allocation of the education budget. Meanwhile, many ministers appeared to be preoccupied with private matters, enjoying their positions. By the way, Jakarta is in flooding right now. It happens every years and people suffer every years. Almost same places are hit by floods. Why? Every years. They don't learn from past experience and no counteractions. Today, we turn our attention to reviewing Indonesia's economy as of February 2025. Our analysis draws on data from the Ministry of Finance's official website, publications by Bank Indonesia, and insights from reputable news outlets. Are you ready? Let's deep dive.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we're doing a deep dive into the Indonesian economy and, focusing on what's been happening from February 1st to March 4th, 2025.
Yeah.
We've got a really, interesting mix of government reports and economic analyses, and we're even going to touch on some insights into Indonesia's Islamic economic activity.
So cool.
Our mission, well, to cut through all the noise and understand the forces shaping Indonesia's economic future.
It's a pretty crucial time for Indonesia. I think, they're aiming for that Indonesia EMA's vision for 2045.
Right.
But there are some serious headwinds to navigate, I think.
For sure. Well, let's start with the big picture.
Okay.
The government set a GDP growth target of 5.2% in the 2025 state budget draft.
Okay.
But are they on track to hit that number?
That's where things get interesting.
Oh, really?
While the target is 5.2%, various institutions, including the government itself, are projecting a slightly more modest growth of 5.0% to 5.1%.
So why the lowered expectations? Is it just the global economic slowdown we've been hearing so much about?
Global factors are definitely playing a role.
Okay.
But there's also a fascinating structural shift happening within Indonesia's manufacturing sector.
Okay.
They're moving towards more capital-intensive industries, which, sounds like a positive step towards higher value production.
Right. Moving up the value chain, embracing more sophisticated technology.
Exactly.
Okay.
But here's the catch.
What's that?
This transition requires significant investment,
Okay.
which could actually strain the national budget.
Oh, wow.
The government needs to walk a tightrope,
Right.
balancing support for these new industries with the need to maintain fiscal stability.
So it's not just about growth numbers. It's about how that money is being spent.
That's right.
Let's dig into the budget breakdown and see where those rupiahs were actually going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Revenue collection is the first piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Is the government meeting its targets?
Yeah.
If not, that could have ripple effects on everything from infrastructure projects to social assistance programs.
I see.
And speaking of spending, what are the major categories?
Yeah.
Where are we seeing progress? And where are things lagging behind?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah, and the answers can tell us a lot about the government's priorities.
Right.
We need to examine the implementation rates for key sectors like infrastructure, social assistance, regional transfers, and those strategic national projects that are supposed to be driving Indonesia's future growth.
Yeah, and we also can't ignore the fiscal deficit.
No.
How is Indonesia financing its spending?
Right.
Is it sustainable in the long run?
All valid points.
Okay.
And here's something that might raise an eyebrow.
Okay.
There's been a significant increase in spending on government salaries this year.
Interesting.
Much higher than the average growth over the past decade.
Hold on. So the government is spending more on its own payroll, even with the economy facing these challenges. That seems a bit counterintuitive.
It does.
Yeah.
It raises questions about efficiency.
Right.
Could those funds be better allocated to other areas that would have a more direct impact on economic growth or social well-being?
It's a question worth exploring, for sure. Well, let's shift gears and look at some of the specific spending programs that have been in the spotlight during February and March.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start? Infrastructure.
Okay.
Social assistance?
Yeah.
Maybe even those big-ticket strategic national projects.
Actually, there's one program that's been generating quite a bit of buzz.
Okay.
And it relates to something we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
The government's focus on supporting key sectors for the future.
Okay.
It's called the Makanan Bergizi program, or MBG for short.
Yes, the MBG.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating initiative with the potential for both social and economic impact.
That's what I was reading.
The aim is to improve the nutritional intake of Indonesian school children.
Okay.
By providing nutritious meals directly to schools.
Sounds like a win-win.
Right.
Helping kids stay healthy and focused while also supporting local farmers and businesses.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They emphasize local sourcing and community engagement.
Okay.
Which aligns with their broader goals of promoting sustainable development and empowering local economies.
But I imagine there are some challenges in implementing a program of this scale.
Sure.
Getting those meals to every school across the archipelago can't be easy.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The MBG is heavily reliant on a complex web of logistics.
Okay.
Everything from procurement to processing to distribution
Mm-hmm.
involves a network of farmers,
Wow.
cooperatives,
Right.
local businesses, and government agencies.
I can see how that many moving parts could lead to inefficiencies.
Oh, yeah.
Or even, well, let's just say opportunities for things to go wrong.
For sure. That's why some civil society groups are calling for greater transparency and accountability in every stage of the program.
Okay.
They want to ensure that the funds are being used effectively.
Right.
And that the children are truly benefiting.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's important to have checks and balances in place, especially when you're dealing with something as crucial as children's health.
Absolutely. And there are other concerns as well.
What's that?
For instance, some worry that the MBG could negatively impact existing school canteens by undercutting their sales.
So the program could unintentionally hurt local vendors who rely on those purchases.
Right.
It's a balancing act.
It is.
Trying to achieve those ambitious social goals while minimizing unintended consequences.
Exactly. And there's another layer of complexity.
Right.
The theoretical framework behind the MBG isn't entirely clear.
Okay.
Which makes it difficult to develop effective guidelines and evaluation mechanisms.
So it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
With room for improvement in terms of both implementation and evaluation.
Mm.
Are there any other spending programs that have been facing similar scrutiny?
Actually, yes.
Oh, really?
Let's talk about infrastructure.
Okay.
Particularly school infrastructure. There's a program called DAC-Physic,
Okay.
which allocates funds for physical infrastructure development in the education sector.
So this is all about building and upgrading schools,
Yes.
creating better learning environments for Indonesian students.
Yes. But here's the catch.
Oh, no.
The allocation for DAC-Physic has actually decreased significantly in recent years.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Why would they cut funding for something as important as school infrastructure?
It seems that the government is shifting its focus to other priorities within the education sector,
Like what?
specifically strengthening basic education in STEM fields.
Interesting. So instead of just focusing on bricks and mortar,
Yeah,
they're investing in the content of education,
that's right.
equipping students with the skills they'll need in a more technologically advanced world.
Precisely.
Okay,
It's part of a broader strategy to prepare Indonesia for the future.
I see.
However, this shift in focus has raised concerns about the potential impact on school infrastructure,
Right.
especially in more remote or under-resourced areas.
It's a tough choice.
It is.
Invest in the future workforce or ensure that the current generation has access to adequate learning facilities. It seems Indonesia is facing some difficult decisions when it comes to allocating resources.
It's a complex situation, and to
Yeah.
make things even more challenging,
Oh,
there have been recent developments
Right.
that are adding another layer of complexity to Indonesia's economic landscape.
well, this sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Okay. Remember how we were talking about Indonesia's aspirations to join BRICS?
Yeah?
Well, that move is directly tied to the global economic picture,
Right.
which has been anything but rosy lately.
Right. Indonesia's economy doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So how is that global slowdown actually impacting them on the ground?
Well, one key indicator is Indonesia's recent GDP growth.
Right.
In the third quarter of 2024, it dipped below 5% to 4.95%.
A sub 5% growth rate that seems to directly challenge the government's ambitious targets. How does this dip compare historically? Is this a significant deviation?
It's definitely a point of concern. Reaching that 5% growth target seems to be a real struggle without some kind of seasonal boost.
Right.
We saw a similar trend in 2023 when third quarter growth also faltered.
So what sectors are dragging down the overall growth? Is there a common thread there?
Well, after the Eid al-Fitr holiday and school break period in the second quarter of 2024, there was a noticeable slowdown in sectors like transportation and warehousing, business services, and accommodation and food services.
Those sectors are heavily reliant on consumer spending.
Yeah.
Which likely tightened up after those holiday periods. That makes sense.
Exactly. And this trend continued into the third quarter of 2024.
Okay.
Agriculture, forestry, and fisheries,
Right.
the third largest sector in the Indonesian economy, also experienced a significant slowdown.
Was that due to the El Nino weather pattern we've been hearing about? Those weather events can have such a huge impact on agricultural output?
Spot on, the previous quarter had seen some positive growth thanks to a recovery from El Nino. But those effects are it's like a temporary boost that's fading away.
Are there any other sectors showing signs of weakness? It sounds like a bit of a domino effect.
Unfortunately, yes. The information and communication sector,
Okay.
which had been a bright spot, also slowed its growth.
This is painting a rather gloomy picture. Are there any positive indicators to counterbalance this downward trend? We need some good news here.
Well, one sector that showed resilience was manufacturing.
Oh, okay.
It actually accelerated its growth.
Okay.
Largely driven by the food and beverage industry.
Interesting. So people are still buying their snacks and drinks even when overall consumer spending is down.
It seems so, however. There's a bit of a caveat here.
Oh.
The growth in the food and beverage industry is primarily happening in labor-intensive segments.
So it's not necessarily high-tech, high-value-added production.
Right.
Not the kind of growth that signals a move towards a more advanced economy.
Exactly. It suggests that while there's activity, it might not be the kind that will propel Indonesia to that next level of economic development.
They still seem to be grappling with that middle-income trap we talked about earlier.
Right. The need to break out of low-value production and embrace innovation and higher-skilled industries, it's a challenge many developing economies face.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of Indonesia's economic picture.
Okay.
Credit and lending.
Okay, let's follow the money. Are businesses and consumers getting the financing they need to grow and thrive?
That's a complex question.
Okay.
Loan growth has been quite modest.
Okay.
And one key indicator is the Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI,
Okay.
suggests that manufacturing isn't exactly booming.
For those who might not be familiar, could you quickly explain what the PMI is and why it's important?
Of course, the PMI is a measure of the health of the manufacturing sector.
Right.
A PMI above 50 signals expansion,
Okay.
while a reading below 50 indicates contraction.
Got it. So what's the PMI telling us about Indonesia right now? Is it cause for concern?
It's dipped below 50.
And this decline is particularly concerning when we consider that Indonesia currently has relatively low interest rates.
So even with cheaper borrowing costs, businesses aren't taking out loans and investing. That seems counterintuitive.
It does.
Yeah.
But it suggests that there are other factors holding them back.
Such as?
It could be lower demand for their products.
Okay.
Or a general uncertainty about the future.
So it's not just about making loans cheap. It's about creating a stable and predictable economic environment where businesses feel confident about investing and growing.
Precisely. And on the consumer side,
Okay.
while there's been some growth in loans,
Okay.
it's primarily in areas that don't necessarily drive economic growth.
Such as what kind of loans are consumers taking out?
Think credit cards and multi-purpose loans.
Okay.
These are often used for consumption rather than investment in things that would benefit the overall economy.
Okay, so there's a lack of investment from both businesses and consumers. This seems like a sign of a lack of confidence in the economy.
It could very well be. People are often hesitant to take on debt and risk when the economic outlook is uncertain.
This all adds up to a pretty challenging picture for Indonesia.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the government's ability to navigate these economic headwinds? Do they have any options?
The government definitely has some tough choices to make.
Right.
They need to find ways to stimulate investment, both domestic and foreign. But that's easier said than done in the current climate.
What kind of strategies could they employ? Are there any levers they can pull to boost confidence and get the economy back on track?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
They need to address those structural issues we talked about.
Uh-huh.
Perhaps by further improving the ease of doing business and creating a more attractive investment environment.
Okay.
They might also need to consider targeted stimulus measures or policy adjustments to encourage lending and investment.
Easier said than done, right?
Yes.
But essential if Indonesia wants to achieve its long-term economic goals.
Absolutely. And speaking of those long-term goals, we've been focusing on the macro-level economic picture, but it's important to remember that these trends have real-world implications for the Indonesian people.
Right. The human impact of economic policies is crucial to consider. Let's dive into some specific examples of how these economic forces are playing out in people's lives.
One area where this is evident is in public sentiment and how people are reacting to the economic situation.
Okay.
There have been some notable demonstrations recently that highlight the growing anxieties within Indonesian society.
Oh, this sounds concerning.
Yeah.
What are the key grievances that people are voicing in these demonstrations? What are they most worried about?
Well, a lot of the frustration seems to stem from the rising cost of living,
Yeah.
which is putting a strain on household budgets.
Right.
People are also concerned about economic inequality and the feeling that the benefits of growth aren't being shared equally.
So it's not just about the raw economic numbers. It's about how those numbers translate into lived experiences for individuals and families. It sounds like there's a growing sense of economic insecurity and a feeling that the government isn't doing enough to address it.
That's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
These demonstrations highlight the importance of social safety nets and policies that address inequality. It's not enough to just focus on GDP growth. The government needs to ensure that growth is inclusive and benefits all segments of society.
It's a reminder that economics isn't just about numbers and graphs. It's about people's lives and their aspirations for a better future.
Absolutely. And this brings us to a recent move by the Ministry of Finance that's generating a lot of discussion and debate.
Okay.
It's called the Payment System Blueprint 2025.
Okay. The Payment System Blueprint 2025. That sounds intriguing. What's the significance of this new regulation? What kind of impact is it expected to have?
Essentially, this new blueprint mandates onshore processing for most financial transactions.
So transactions that previously might have been processed internationally now have to be handled within Indonesia.
Exactly. It's a move that some see as a way to bolster domestic financial institutions and potentially limit the influence of foreign companies in Indonesia's financial services market.
That raises some interesting questions. Is this a protectionist move designed to shield domestic players from competition? Or is it a strategic step to enhance security and control over financial flows?
It's likely a bit of both.
Okay.
On the one hand, it could be seen as a way to promote the growth of Indonesian financial institutions and create jobs within the country. On the other hand, it could also be a way to address concerns about data security and the potential for financial vulnerabilities arising from reliance on foreign systems.
It's a fascinating development that highlights the complexities of navigating a globalized economy while also trying to assert national sovereignty and protect domestic interests.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out and what kind of impact it has on both the Indonesian economy and its relationships with foreign companies and investors.
Agreed. And this move also underscores a theme we've been discussing throughout this deep dive.
Yeah.
The Indonesian government's efforts to exert greater control over key sectors of the economy.
Right, from supporting specific industries like food and beverage manufacturing to promoting STEM education. And now with this payment system blueprint shaping the financial landscape, they seem to be taking a more active role in guiding the economy's direction.
Absolutely. And this brings us back to the question of whether these interventions will be enough to overcome the challenges Indonesia is facing. They're certainly not shying away from making bold moves, but only time will tell if these strategies will be effective in achieving their ambitious long-term goals.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the macroeconomic picture to the micro-level impact on people's lives. But there's one more area I'd like to explore before we wrap things up. It's something that often gets overlooked in discussions about economic development, but it plays a significant role in shaping Indonesia's social and economic fabric.
You must be talking about the Islamic economy.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating and dynamic sector that deserves more attention.
Let's dive into that in our next segment.
Okay. The Islamic economy is often seen as this, niche market, but in Indonesia, it's a powerful force that's deeply intertwined with the broader economy.
I've always been fascinated by Indonesia's Islamic economy. It's not just about religious observance. It's a vibrant sector that's driving innovation and growth.
Absolutely. The Kajian Ekonomi dan Keuangan Syariah Indonesia report highlights the continued growth of Islamic finance, halal food sectors, modest fashion, and Muslim-friendly tourism.
It's impressive how these sectors are contributing to GDP growth and employment, creating opportunities across various industries.
And it goes beyond just economic contributions. Remember how we talked about those protests and the rising cost of living?
Yeah.
Well, the Islamic economic sector, with its emphasis on social justice and ethical practices, could play a role in addressing some of those concerns.
That's an interesting point. Could you elaborate on that a bit? How could the principles of Islamic economics contribute to solutions for those issues?
Well, Islamic finance, for example, promotes risk sharing and ethical investments, which could help to create a more equitable financial system. And the halal industry, with its focus on sustainability and ethical sourcing, could contribute to more responsible consumption patterns.
So it's not just about creating halal products. It's about creating a more ethical and sustainable economic ecosystem.
Precisely, and this aligns with a key characteristic of Indonesian society, generosity. Indonesia was ranked as the most generous country in the world, according to the World Giving Index.
Right. The generosity is deeply rooted in Islamic values, and it manifests in various ways from charitable giving to community support.
Exactly, and that cultural foundation of generosity could be a driving force in shaping a more inclusive and equitable economy.
It's a powerful reminder that economic development isn't just about numbers and policies, it's also about values and cultural influences.
Well said. And when we consider the challenges Indonesia is facing, the global slowdown, the need for structural reforms, the rising cost of living, this unique blend of economic pragmatism and social values could be a key to navigating those complexities.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Indonesian economy,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways you would highlight for our listeners?
Well, I think Indonesia is at a crossroads, facing a myriad of challenges, but also brimming with potential.
Mhm.
They're grappling with a global slowdown, structural issues in their economy and social unrest, but they're also making strategic investments in education infrastructure and key sectors like the Islamic economy.
They're also making bold moves to exert greater control over their economic destiny, as we saw with the payment system blueprint and their decision to join BRICS.
Exactly. It's a dynamic and evolving situation with no easy answers, but the choices Indonesia makes in the coming years will have a profound impact on its trajectory for decades to come.
This has been an incredible journey exploring the intricate workings of the Indonesian economy. We've uncovered challenges, opportunities, and a nation striving to forge its own path.
And what's fascinating is that this is just a snapshot in time. The Indonesian economy is constantly evolving, responding to both internal and external pressures.
So we encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning about this complex and fascinating nation. Who knows what surprises and insights await us in the next chapter of Indonesia's economic story? Until next time.